Episode 1. Looking forward to it.
So, hi everybody. I am Lisa Bresson. I am a program manager in the North region of Grow NJ Kids.
I'm Stephanie Boyson, Senior TAS, Technical Assistant Specialist for Grow NJ Kids North Region.
So this is kind of a new format for us. We have decided to start to shift away from the traditional webinar format, and we are kind of exploring the podcast world.
Switching it up.
Yes.
And I think knowing what we do for a living and the amount of hours that we travel in a car, for me personally, I love podcasts. Podcasts are something that I use every day. I really use it for not only for my brain to have more activity during my driving time, but I use the podcast to either switch my brain off sometimes. Sometimes we do a lot of work at work. You know, our minds are heavy, we're talking a lot, we have a lot of information processing. So sometimes podcasts for me are to kind of disseminate and process that information. So anyone who knows me knows I talk about all kinds of podcasts, all kinds of topics, anywhere from education to NPR to more of the crime. So this is so up my alley. I was so excited when we started talking about this. You want to go into how we kind of thought of this?
Sure.
Starbucks?
So Steph and I spend a lot of time in Starbucks, and they become huge brainstorming, brain blast sessions. And so we wanted to try and engage in a format that reflected our conversational work as opposed to just delivering information. So that's kind of why we decided to try and shift this and see what happens.
Yeah, and we kind of fell upon this actually after one of our brainstorming sessions. We kind of paused and we were like, wait, this would be, if anyone...
This could work.
If anyone heard this conversation, they'd be like, number one, are they okay? And number two, I want to know more about that. So I think this kind of style for us seems natural, and it's just another method, another format, another way to get information to people. So it's very exciting.
So I think what's going to happen is as the episodes progress, we're going to be bringing in some guests, bringing in people who are sort of have a certain special something in different areas of early childhood development and education.
Yeah.
And child care. So stay tuned for all of those too. So for this episode, Disabling the Label, Redefining Children's Behaviors, we're going to frame this episode with 3 big questions around space, time, and climate. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but those are sort of the 3 defining realms of a classroom environment. And we'll also look at what I've been calling windows of emotion in children, meaning moments of extreme emotion that children have, both what's perceived as positive and negative emotion, and figuring out how to teach children to handle those when there's this open window, so to speak.
Yeah, and wherever you're listening to this, we say listen twice, only because I know for myself, you know, I'm either driving or I'm either cooking dinner or I'm doing laundry. I listen to podcasts at home as well. So sometimes I have to go back and listen to it, and you know, because you get caught up in the multitasking. So if you are listening to this, try listening to it twice if you can. But if not, we're just glad that you are listening in the first place. So when we are talking about, you know, this framework that we're using, consider your classroom. So if you're a director, consider your classrooms. If you're a coach, consider the classrooms of the people you're supporting. If you're a teacher assistant, anything along those lines, consider a classroom, but also consider a certain behavior, a child with certain behaviors, because that's really going to frame our the intention for the episode. So consider the classroom, consider a behavior. Keep that in mind for the rest of the podcast.
And it's kind of, you know, recognizing these spaces or these teachable moments for social emotional learning before trying to figure out how to fill them. So we hope to achieve a little bit of both today.
So if we can just jump right in. So Lisa, I know you were a teacher, so was I.
I was.
And we have had students in the past that had exhibited these behaviors. And it just seems like those children, in our minds, were never absent. Always at school. They were never sick, right? Those are the kids that came every day,
Always.
consistently, and you felt like you never got a break. But
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Part of my perception of those children, I remember, was it wasn't necessarily the behaviors, because I knew instinctively that it was a developmental process, but I didn't know how to handle them. Mm-hmm. And that was what caused the anxiety of knowing that this child was going to show up today. So I knew that it was a developmental process for the child, but I wasn't always fully equipped with knowing how to use these extreme behaviors in a way that was teachable for the child.
Yeah. So let's say you didn't have that prior knowledge of development, right? Let's just say you went in and the language that I've heard was, we don't have the training to deal with the student. I worry about the safety of others. Her or his behavior is unpredictable, right? They don't belong here. So we want to change that framework, change that frame of speaking to the child about labeling, because I feel like a lot of what we see out there, a lot of the behaviors we see is because of something else that's going on, something else that's happening either at home or with themselves. So that language, we want to take that and reframe that language. I just do want to touch upon Dr. Brazelton's work. He talked about discipline is teaching, not punishing. Discipline is conceived as negative, but discipline is a teaching moment. So,
and as part of our discussion about space and time, a little bit later we're going to talk about the classroom rules and developing those and what that looks like.
So our title is Disable the Label. So if we think about students in our classrooms, or of the classrooms that we serve and support, a lot of the language is, well, they might be this, or they're a little bit of that, or they may have processing. But none of it is diagnosed. None of it is for sure. So we want to disable the label. Coming back from NACCE conference in Nashville, I went to this fantastic presentation about challenging behaviors. And one of the slides in the session said, labels are for jars. I thought that was such a fantastic way to just...
Label your spice rack, not your children.
Exactly. So having that growth mindset of, if I label a child, I put them in a box, and that's where they stay. So taking them outside of that box and learning more about their behaviors and why it's happening can take, that label can just put them in a box and they can never come out. Something else you talked about too was, if we think of the behaviors of all children, right? And let's say we go to the doctor and we have a headache and the doctor says, well, we'll just take your spleen out. That should work. But that's not the right prescription for you. So if we think of how we manage behaviors, it's not the correct way or the developmentally appropriate way to deal with all behaviors.
Right.
So think of behaviors as individual for individual children. How can we help that one child?
There's no one right answer, and that's what makes the question so difficult. Because the answer is going to look different for everyone, and that's why through this we really want to help develop tools to be able to use children's behaviors to promote more positive behaviors. And so that includes concrete ideas and strategies, but it also includes having a wide perspective of behavior, and perspective is a very powerful tool. So if you almost look at it in the way of entering into an unfamiliar house, right? So you're walking up the sidewalk and all you see is the front of the house, which might give you a little bit of anxiety. What am I going to see inside? I wonder what's going on around back. I wonder what's happening. How can I get out in case of a fire? You never know. So having the perspective of this house from several different sides, then you have the opportunity of knowing how to get out if you need to. What are some beautiful views? What's going on beside the house? What's going on in the upstairs of the house? So having multiple perspectives on a behavior allows you to use that behavior in a way that will help that child work through and develop emotionally.
Yeah, and that's a great analogy for any children, especially the ones that we perceive as having a challenging behavior. If you think of getting to the root of that problem, it is uncomfortable. It could be anxiety inducing because some of those problems can stem from something happening at home. And that's a hard thing to navigate. So
that physical space piece, because you just mentioned home and what might be happening there. Steph, if you think about the physical space of a classroom, what are some ways that the physical space and the arrangement could affect children's behavior, both positively and negatively?
Yeah, and I think there's 100 answers to this question, but I think personally and professionally, I think for me, I walk into a classroom, and if the walls are just packed with stuff, it's very overstimulating. I have a personal story. My mom can attest to this. I was in the second or third grade.
Shout out to Mom.
Yeah, hey Nancy. I was so bored in one of my classes so this is the underwhelming portion of it too. I was so bored in class, I came home and I told her how many ceiling tiles were in the ceiling. I was so understimulated that I wasn't paying attention. So you have the extreme spectrum when it comes to overstimulation and understimulation. So you want that nice balance of if a child walks into the room, what do they feel like? Are they feeling stressed because there's so much going on? If the room arrangement if the rooms are too crowded, is it overwhelming for them there? Is there not enough materials? Are they going to be able to play and be engaged? Are they able to burn energy within the space? Meaning, is there a space for them to be active with their bodies? Also, something that we really talk about that's really important is that area for cozy space, an area where you can get away from the hardness of the classroom and just be comfortable. And even if you're having kind of a calm down moment, a lot of our kids need that de-stimulation where they're super, super hyped and their energy's going, but they might need a space to decompress.
Yeah, and I think when I think about this piece and the cozy area of a classroom, and then I think about how I feel when I go home and I put on really fluffy pajamas and I have a really fluffy blanket and I love sinking into a giant beanbag that happens to be in the corner of my living room. That's a true story. So if we need that as the adults who care for the children, why do we feel as though that's not an important piece of the classroom?
Yes.
And that it's just something to have in the classroom? And for a lot of children, your classroom or the classroom that they're in is the safest, most comfortable place that they know. And that's a really important piece to consider depending on what population what community your school might be in, but that's always something that to consider when looking at your own arrangement and what the purpose of that cozy space really is.
Yeah.
It's not just to check a box off on a list.
Right. Yeah, and especially the feeling of safety too. You just said the safety piece. If you think of a child walking into the classroom, like I said before, does their body feel safe, right? The physical, their bodies, but do they, in their minds and hearts and souls, do they feel safe in that way? In the inside, is their heart racing? Are they scared? They may not seem so, but thinking about that safety piece, walking into the classroom and knowing they're going to be safe there is huge for the physical environment. And
you mentioned a little bit earlier about display, and you mentioned about what's up on the walls, what is up on the walls and what is not up on the walls. And having, in terms of that, it's also safety. So having things like a linear schedule, having something that allows children to have predictability, having things up on the walls that are meaningful to them or meaningful to their families, and having the display reflect them is a really very strong strategy for just creating a community climate in your classroom.
And space. I remember as a teacher wanting everything to match. I still do. That's kind of that's a thing in my home too. But I remember wanting to have things look pretty, and when I first started teaching. But that's not necessarily what all children need and all kids want. they need things that represent themselves. They need pictures of their families and their cultures and their abilities. They need things in the classroom that make them feel like they're a part of the community. So that's a big piece there. And as a teacher, I wanted them to feel that way, but for me it was more, oh, this looks pretty. They may like this.
Right.
But now seeing it from this side, you have to have the space where they feel like they're a part of it.
So, and one other quick point before we sort of continue to move through. We talked about display, and we discussed the extreme importance of a true cozy area. What do you feel? What does the room arrangement? What message does that send to the children about whether they can feel emotionally safe in there or not?
I think when it comes to emotional safetyness, I think we need to consider what we have in the different interest areas, and also how the room is set up. Meaning, are we able to walk across interest areas? Are we able to walk across children? It's too crowded. Are we able to have a space in the classroom for our own personal items where we can keep that, those things to ourselves? Even a little basket if you can't have cubbies. Also, again, we mentioned the cozy space, but also, the teachers in the classroom, and I think myself as well, being able to be there emotionally and be able to add language, I really think helps children self-regulate during the day. But having that space to, move all your things and say, I'm going to play with myself. Having the access to play alone.
Yes.
In the classroom.
Yes.
Having the access to be like, I need my space right now, and not having to share or play with a friend or play in a group. Some kids that are new or just, don't want to play with someone that day should have that space to self-regulate and play by themselves.
Right. And the sharing and friendship and community building piece we could talk about forever.
Yes, I know. We can go on and on about that. But I think the way that we set up our classroom and the way we are intentionally formatting this podcast is almost a preventative discipline. It's almost that we're setting you guys up, or setting our teachers up for success in the way that we're checking off all the boxes of setting up the space, time, and climate for our children so we can help them with behaviors that they have. So question for you, Lisa. How can your daily schedule be used to promote positive behaviors?
The structure of the day is an art. It's an art of ups and downs and ins and outs.
It's a dance. Definitely a dance.
It's definitely a dance. And as the classroom staff, as a teacher, thinking about, do you feel stress at any given points of the day? And which parts of your daily routine make you the most stressed as the teacher? And we're going to talk about that throughout this episode, about examining your own physical and emotional reactions to things, including your physical and emotional reactions to children's behaviors. But the pieces of the daily routine that cause you the most stress are most likely causing the children the most stress also.
Definitely.
So, we always look at the balance between whole group times and small group times and individual choice times, and there's this whole balance with transitions. And a lot of the times, what Steph and we call it the whole group trap.
It's a trap.
It's kind of the feeling of, okay, it'll be safer and easier this way because all of the children are together.
Have control.
But it becomes much more difficult when all of the children are together. And a lot of misbehaviors, and this is kind of a space to notice when you do go back to your classrooms and after listening to this, is noticing what parts of the day most of the misbehaviors are occurring, or what you're considering to be a misbehavior. At what times of the day are they occurring? Are they occurring during more rigid parts of the day, or are they occurring during times of the day when the children are interacting more? Because the different conflicts that the children have are going to look different based on the time of the day. And one of the pieces that happens in many classrooms is, right, we set classroom rules. So there's a set of rules. And sometimes they should be co-created by the teacher and the children through conversations. But what that really is, just like Stephanie said in the beginning, it's really setting an intention. It's setting a social emotional intention for your classroom. So, for example, if during one circle time you have classroom rules, this is the classroom rule development day, right?
Mm-hmm.
The children won't know how to follow those rules the very next day, or that very same afternoon. So it's really about teaching towards the rules and not expecting that rule is going to be followed perfectly right away. It's setting an intention of how would you like your classroom community to look and feel and interact with one another throughout the course of the year. And these rules are just as much for teachers as they are for the children, because it is the role of the teacher to teach towards those rules.
Question for you. What part of the day, now say what age group you taught as well.
So I was in a classroom for many years, over a decade, that was mixed age. So the children were in their early threes coming in and left when they were 5. So it was a mixed age 3 to 5 year old classroom.
Okay. So what time of day or what activity caused you the most stress? What stressed you out the most during the day? It might differ from the beginning till the end you were teaching, but like overall on average, what was your most stressful time of day?
Transitions. The transitions were the hardest piece. The nap time transition, lining up transitions, those are always really difficult times to navigate, because we need to maintain, as the teacher, there are logistics. There is a 1 + 1 = 2 piece. We can't rush through the hallways running because there's other classrooms that are doing work. We can't rush through the main office, or we can't rush through because we have to pass through another classroom to get to the hallway, for example, which happens sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I think that the biggest piece for me was realizing that intentional transitions don't have to be directive. So one example would be, say we're in the classroom and we're going to the playground. I need to make sure that my transition allows the children to pass through the halls relatively quietly, because there's other classrooms with their doors open.
Right.
But once I get to the playground, the children don't necessarily need to be that calm. So, for example, so really what the process of deciding what the intention of the transition is, okay, where am I? We're in the classroom. Where do we need to go? We need to go to the playground. I know I'm going to be passing by many classrooms where they're doing work, and we need to sort of maintain a level of invisibility. So I might not choose the loudest song or the loudest body movement that I can possibly choose when we're walking through the hall, because that's going to, it's going to create a lot of distraction and disruption in the hallway.
Yeah.
So I might choose something like, okay, you guys, so I think what I want to do is we're going to the playground, and I'm going to pretend, I think I'm going to bring my puppy, so I'm going to hold the puppy really close in my arms so that the puppy is ready to go outside. Okay, so everybody pet the puppy, okay? You might pat him on his head. You might tell him to shh, shh, shh. But we're going to pass through the hallway and we're going to hold our puppies, okay? So let's do it. So what you've done there is you've created a situation where the children will kind of stay quieter in the hallways, quiet-ish in the hallways, but you've also allowed it to be fun.
And engaging.
And engaging, right. And so, if we want to squeeze a little lesson in there, we can say, see, and because we're being so quiet, those classrooms, Miss Stephanie in her classroom, she's reading to her kids now, so we're not disrupting her, and that's very respectful. Right. So you can infuse social emotional learning into those lessons. It doesn't have to be a directive, catch a bubble catch a bubble type of transition.
Yes.
but really breaking down the steps of a transition to see what's appropriate at that time.
Yeah.
Once you get outside and you're getting closer to the playground, maybe you can start barking like puppies, and you can start to, make the transition a little bit more active. So it's really deciding what the intention of it is.
And transitions are individualized for centers too, because sometimes from the classroom to the playground, it's downstairs, across the hallway, and the safety has to be a part of it too. So making sure that we have safety and engagement and just fun. Also, just that's the one thing about kids is you need to have fun. You yourself,
not the F word.
You yourself being rigid is just gonna make the structure. It infuses into your practice, and it's gonna get to them too. Right. So just have fun with it. But the one thing that we don't want is that idle time. Just the time where they're not doing anything. For me personally, the most stressful time of the day was wintertime. Time to get your coats on.
Right.
There'd be scarves flying and gloves flying and jackets upside down, shoes thrown, all of that just seemed really crazy for me. So that was my most stressful time. I think lining up to go outside, either to go home or to go outside on the playground during wintertime, specifically wintertime.
And so that's a good point, actually, because your transitions will change, and the length of time that transitions take will change based on the season, based on the time of year, and the children's comfort level in the classroom.
Interest, topic, theme.
Right. And so that up and down, making sure that the daily schedule allows for times of quiet, but also allows for times of active, energetic. During the wintertime, it's funny because you mentioned that winter's coming, everybody.
Yeah, winter's coming.
Winter is coming. There were some days when we did our entire group circle time in the morning standing up. Every single piece of the group of circle time had movement attached to it.
Right.
To the point where after circle time was done, they were grateful to be sitting down.
Yes. Yes.
So
and they crisscross applesauce just on their own.
And magically it happened.
Yes.
So each piece of my morning circle time had a movement attached, and that helped to regulate some of that pent up energy that always happens when the children are pent up indoors a lot.
Yep.
So
and I think a part of what we want to make sure that we communicate to all teachers of all ages is if you have the same whole group strategy every day, same song, same weather chart, same everything, they're going to lose interest very quickly. So
which is why we decided to start a podcast.
Yay! Diversifying your whole group. I mean, we're not saying whole group is bad. Whole group is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
Circle time is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
But what we have to do is structure the whole group time as different, either twice a week, add movements, add rhythm, add song, add dance, add rhyming, add different math. All that kind of stuff that's different will change the way they're excited for circle time then. They're not like, I got to circle time, got to do the weather song. Songs are important, and being consistent is important, but the whole group time should be different week to week.
We fell into the discussion on the whole group trap. So
it's a trap.
we haven't really visualized what the perceived negative behaviors during whole group time are, because everybody who is in a classroom right now who has ever been in a classroom can see them in their head.
Sure.
So we don't need to spell it out.
Yep.
But so some of the things that we are talking about will help alleviate some of those behaviors, and really, and shifting your perspective on what is the purpose of whole group time.
Yep.
What is the purpose of each part of the daily routine? And we can leave that as a question.
Yeah.
And maybe address that during a later episode or discussion. But what is the intention of each part of your day? And really work off of that. And what is happening with the children's behavior. If the children's behavior, if something's not going right, they're going to tell you with their behavior. So that's where we look inward as the teacher and see how can I meet their needs.
Right.
So we talked about environment, physical environment. We talked about time, linear time, and what that looks like. The last piece is something that we call climate, and you'll see on the notes that are attached to this podcast link, you'll see the source there, but we talk about climate and what contributes to the climate of a classroom, and how does that climate shape interactions in the classroom? How does it shape language development? How does it shape social emotional development?
Yeah, and most of the time you can walk into a classroom and feel the mood, feel the tone.
Yes.
You can feel if it's chaos. You can walk in and you can feel the lightness of a classroom. So that's the one thing, when you walk into your classroom, what do you feel? Because if you feel that your classroom is chaotic or your classroom is balanced, that's great. Take the temperature of your classroom. And how can you do that? If you walk in, what number one, what do you feel? What do you see? How are the students interacting? And how can you, the big piece also we're missing here too, Lisa, is we're thinking about a classroom that's just one teacher. I think we should also,
yes,
the focus should be on classrooms that have multiple teachers, because how are you and your teacher getting along?
Yes.
How are you and the TA getting along? How are you and the students, and how does the group feel? Mm-hmm. Because that we should really take into consideration too. And we talk a little bit about how there's a negative classroom climate that could be chaotic and a little out of control, but the positive could feel safe and respectful and welcoming and supportive. So those two kinds of classrooms, you'd want positive, and the negative could happen sometimes, but having that balance of feeling safe and having it be welcoming. Because the one thing we said before is, if a child walks in the classroom and they're like, no thank you, I don't want to be here, you wonder why. Why does that child feel the separation anxiety? But you want them to at least transition into a welcoming classroom.
And children of this age, of preschool age, and even younger especially, they're paying attention to, do the adults in this classroom love each other? Does this classroom have space for me specifically? Does it smell good? That's something that I bring up often.
Yeah.
It's that very, very personal sense of smell, and it's very powerful for children, for young children, especially under the age of 3. We could go into that,
Yes.
They can smell the scent of your mother is your first sign of safety. So
Sure.
The way that your room smells, the lighting, the noise level, all of those things contribute to this climate. Sometimes with the noise level, and this goes back to the physical space piece, sometimes you might be in a basement space, or you might be in a small space where the acoustics of the room, there's lots of hard surfaces. There's not a lot of soft things. And so going back to the physical space, you can't change the size of your room or the material that's on the room is made of, but you can add rugs, you can add fabrics, you can add things that absorb sound. So that's a whole, that was acoustics 101.
Yes.
But so the physical space and the arrangement of the room and the sound absorbing materials really do have they have an impact on the climate.
Right. And I want to consider too, when a child walks into your classroom or your school, if you're a director or someone in admin, we don't necessarily understand what the child is coming from.
Not yet.
So do they have trauma in their life? Do they live with their grandparents? Do they are their parents divorcing? Do they come from a great family but maybe necessarily not the best neighborhood? So even temperament, attachment, do they have great relationships with adults? So we don't know those things yet. So for new children coming in, that's a really big thing to consider here. But children walking into your classroom, I still remember a girl that I had in kindergarten that would not even step foot in my classroom. She held onto the door for half of the day. I mean,
wow.
she was so scared to come in.
Why?
Because
Why
she didn't want to leave her mom.
Oh.
So it's that plus she had things going on at home as well.
Uh-huh.
So she was so nervous to step in, and I think it took about, I want to say, a month before she even came up and sat in a group. She was one of those kids that needed the space to herself. She liked that space. But we didn't know the background, and parents don't have to tell us. They don't have to. But knowing that piece of information will help them feel safe in the classroom.
And not wanting to step into the classroom and not wanting to participate in a group time could be perceived as a negative behavior.
Right.
It could be perceived as a negative behavior if we're not taking into consideration all of the pieces of this child.
Yes. And that's like it's the house analogy. They have multi-layers, multiple spaces in their brain and their bodies that you don't necessarily understand yet, and that's okay. But it does take time for that one particular kind of child, the new scared child, to integrate into your classroom.
And the way that classroom staff approach these types of behaviors is another piece. We haven't talked about the language part yet, or both verbal language and nonverbal language. We could have an entire discussion about nonverbal language, but are the words, so here's another question, are the words and body movements that classroom staff use, do they help support a climate of creativity and exploration, and that it's okay to make mistakes and try again? Or are the children on edge because they feel as though there might be a wrong answer to their question, to the teacher's question?
Right.
So having that climate of openness and having that climate that it's okay to try things out, it's okay to experiment, and that includes experimenting with behaviors too.
Yeah, and that goes to values. I think we talked about what we want our classroom to look like and feel like, but again, how do you want the children to treat each other? How do you want the children to treat you and your staff in the classroom? What do you want your body and your body language and language to communicate to others? And my biggest thing is, how do you want the children to remember you? How do you want the children to leave your classroom every day or at the end of the year and talk about you after that? How do you want to be remembered? And I think a big part of the remembrance is how you made them feel.
Yes.
So it's all about how you make children feel inside, and if they come in your classroom every day, they're going to like just being there because you're there. But how are you communicating that sense of being with them every day?
That's interesting. There's a lot of ways, and the body language piece is another. And one thing that there's the discussion about good job, good job, and the way that we talk to children about their process work, and these they're expressions of delight, they're expressions of interest, and they do help create a positive feel, because it's the inflection in your voice, and it's your eye contact and your smile, and so those things don't take away from the climate, but there's much further to go with those verbal expressions of delight. And so when we talk about how does that affect, how can we continue to promote positive behaviors with these expressions of delight and ways of validating children's work and validating children's efforts. When we say good job at breathing, good job at blinking your eyes, what does that mean? And so being very specific. So if good job is part of your vocabulary, and this is another going back to what we said in the beginning about recognizing spaces before we can fill them. If good job is part of your vocabulary right now, when you when you find yourself saying it the next time, think about what you're saying good job at, and good job about, and try adding on to your own sentence. So, good job throwing out that garbage. Way to be a class helper. Right?
Yeah.
So it's being very specific about what
they did well.
What they did well, exactly. And so that's one space for good job. Another perspective on that is when a child feels confident. So this was another piece that we said we were going to bring back around of how to address behaviors, both positive and negative. So we talked a lot about negatively perceived behaviors, in whole group time and at transition times. But how do we perceive positive behaviors? And how much do we draw attention to them?
Yeah.
And when you have nonverbal children or children who don't have the vocabulary to describe their own emotions yet, which we all do from
right.
zero to 5,
yeah.
How do you recognize when a child is proud of themselves? How are you recognizing when a child is feeling good about their own behavior or about their own work that they've done?
Right.
And when we, as the adult, no matter what you say, it carries a big stick. So that's kind of one way of saying it. So anything that you might say negatively carries a lot of weight.
Yep. Just
like whatever you say positively carries a very, very large, that stick is heavy.
Right. Yeah.
So when we say things like, I like that, or I like your red shoes, I like that drawing, what is that doing for that feeling? So this is kind of abstract, and we don't have to go into it too deeply. This is another question that we can leave you with. But when a child has feelings of pride or feelings of accomplishment or feelings of just positive feelings that we're trying to foster in them as early childhood educators, how do we allow them to hold on to that feeling and not take it as our own? By saying, I like that. Right? So this is a long discussion, and neither of us truly have the answers to it, but it's a worthy discussion to think about how are we allowing that child to keep their positive feelings? Are we helping them label it? When a child comes up to you as a teacher, right? So if I say, look, so now Stephanie as the teacher has to choose how to approach that comment.
Right. Yeah, and I think if we have children that do something in front of us that they're proud of, they look up at you. They don't wait to hear what you say. They look at you. Wow.
So eye contact.
Yeah. So again, it goes back to that in the body language. So let's say you're outside and they made a basket. They look at you.
Okay, so here we go. Miss Stephanie, look.
I see you made a basket. That must have been art? Oh. So this goes back to the talk less, ask more. How did you use that paintbrush when you were painting that art?
I was doing this and this and this. Look.
So it goes back to that feeling you have about the praise. It's human nature to want to praise people and to want to be positive. But when the children do something that they're proud of, they look at you for that inflection in your face, that positive affect in your face, and they want to see how you react, not necessarily hear what you're going to say.
And you can say things like, do you feel that feeling inside? You look really, really proud. You look like you just did a really good job. Yeah. You look like you are really happy with your work. See that feeling? Doesn't that feel good? Doesn't it feel like sunshine? You can help them identify with that positive feeling so that the next time they're feeling it, they can label it, which which is part of the language, social emotional language development as well.
Yep.
And so we talked about perceiving behaviors and redefining how we see them, and really seeing it through the lens of young children use difficult behaviors as they're trying out different ways of interacting. They don't know yet that this is something that they might not be able to do yet. They're still trying things on for size. They're still role-playing. They're still
testing your boundaries,
testing the edges of these emotions, right? And they have a very hard time controlling impulses. So that's the child development, executive functioning, self-regulation piece, which we could go into in another time. But they throw themselves on the floor. They hurt themselves. They hurt others. They destroy the classroom. And these are really extreme windows of emotion. Really extreme times of emotion. And when we perceive these as just that, they're deep expressions of emotion, are they really ready to hear you talk when they're in the throes of a tantrum, right? When they've flipped their lid.
Right.
When their primal brain is just saying, I can't take this anymore.
Right.
So they are feeding off of the way that the adults in their life, the people who keep them safe, are reacting.
Yeah. And I want us to consider that the classroom and the structure, so again, the time, space, and climate, consider those as one of the reasons possibly that this behavior is happening. So consider maybe the transitions are maybe not structured, maybe there's idle time, maybe whole group's too long. So again, the spectrum can be from what's happening at home to what happened in the car ride to the school that day. It could be that they didn't have breakfast that morning. It also could be consider the classroom and the structure, time, climate as a part of why the behaviors are manifesting in that way. So just consider that. I think we never, this goes back to the language that we talk about when we don't have the training for that, we don't have the space for him or her, they don't fit well here, but we should consider what we are doing as a part of that.
And what we do have is our own ability to see many perspectives.
Yes.
And that's completely in our control as a teacher and as a classroom staff. And you know, we talk a little bit about stress response, and you know, most folks have heard the term fight or flight, and that all comes from the primal lizard brain, which we can go into that some other time also. But it's the part of the brain that's responsible for the control of emotions and what happens when stress is introduced. Some people have overactive stress responses. Some folks have underactive stress responses. And this is why it's important as the adult in the classroom to really examine your own physical response to stress.
Right.
Children's behaviors sometimes cause us stress.
Yes.
So how are we reacting to that as well?
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago, Armchair Expert by Dax Shepard, one of my favorite podcasts, and he had Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who is the Surgeon General of California, the first one of California, and she had this incredible TED Talk about adverse childhood experiences. And if you knew the podcast and who the host was, you'd be like, why is this very intelligent, smart, statuesque woman talking to Dax Shepard? Well, we find out that he had trauma in his life as a child as well. So she had this analogy that I will keep forever and ever and ever as long as I'm in education. She had this analogy about, let's say you step into a forest, right? Or my front yard if you live in where I live. You step into a forest and you see a bear, right? Your normal stress response, that amygdala, that part of your brain turns on, and your pupils dilate and your hands sweat and your heart races. That's a normal stress response, right? You fight or you flight. Now, what if, she says, which I found fascinating, what if that bear came home every night? What if that bear was in your classroom every day? So that the consistent amount of toxic stress you have manifests and develops in a way that will shape your stress response forever.
And that response is perfectly natural.
Yes.
It's a perfectly necessary part of being a human, as long as there's a bear.
Yes. Yeah.
If there's no bear there, then that stress response becomes an issue.
Yeah.
Becomes a problem for being part of relationships.
Right. And trauma is very broad. You can remember things when you were younger to being very simple to something very toxic. So in this space that we talk about, the stress response, if we are in a classroom and we have a child that just melts down, breaks down, and is, very, very emotional, that could be an overactive stress response. If we have a child who maybe falls and doesn't cry or gets into a fight and doesn't have any emotions, that could be underactive, because it's possible that child could have consistent stress in his or her life. And we know a couple of kids that fight, fall down, fall off a chair, and don't cry, and other kids who have who fall off a chair, get hurt, and it's like it's like Shakespeare. It's like the most dramatic thing ever,
Right.
and they're fine.
Right.
So there's that spectrum of stress response. But again, we want to reiterate that kind of stress response at that age group could be normal.
Right.
So, but just think of that bear analogy. What if that child comes to the classroom every day, or on the bus, gets bullied on the bus every day? Because that young kids do have that transportation piece. So consider the amount of stress that they have every day, and we want to make our classrooms a non-stressful environment, not to add to the stress they have already. At that age that they have stress already, it's kind of crazy.
So the next time, so if we leave the climate piece with this strategy of taking the temperature, next time you have a child who has a full-blown tantrum, or you're having an extra stressful transition time in your classroom, take a step back, examine and scan your own body, and examine and scan what your eyes are doing, how fast you're moving in the classroom, the tone and volume of your voice as the teacher, and see what's happening in your own body and with your own voice, and see how it's contributing or helping the level of tension in the classroom. So we can leave that part there, because that's recognizing a space, and seeing, seeing how the role of the adult in this stressful interaction with the child.
Yeah. So when we also talk about our body language, I just want to reiterate this piece too. Lisa said before that the negative interactions aren't always verbal. The negative interactions can be how our body's facing children, what our eyes are doing.
Yes, laser beam eyes.
Yeah, and I think about me in somewhere when I was younger with my parents. They didn't have to say anything. They just look at me and I'm like, I should probably stop doing what I'm doing. But that's my parents. And you're in a teaching setting, you want to use your language as the base for discipline, which is not punishment, it's teaching. So use your body and your voice as a vehicle for a teaching moment. So again, going back to that behavior piece, if you have a child that's melting down, breaking down, maybe that time is not the time to talk to them about here's why this happened and here let's figure this out. It's about recognizing the space of their what their bodies are doing, what their bodies are feeling, what their brains are feeling. It's a teaching moment. I think we have to remember that we have to be less reactive first, because we think of the behaviors of why they're doing it. Why would they want to pour water down the sink? Why would they want to splash around the water table and get water everywhere? Why is the sand all over the floor? It's because they're engaged in something. They want to do something. And I think we think of children's behavior as doing it out of spite. We take it personal. But the children that are playing the water table and getting water everywhere, they really like water play. They really enjoy it.
We didn't talk about that piece yet, about the sensory appetite, which the sensory needs of young children, and that can be the source of a lot of perceived negative behaviors. They just need to touch. So any of the big body kind of play that you see children roughhousing, or they're body checking each other, or they're wrapping their arms around you, it's a sensory piece of the developing child. So even reframing the way that you see big body play and roughhousing and attaching and wrapping around, all of that is the child's developing systems trying to regulate. And so when you're trying to walk across the room during cleanup time and you have one child wrapped around your ankle, so it's hard not to peel them off and react.
Right.
But always considering first why that might be happening, and that they might be overstimulated, and that their systems might be overstimulated by the noise level of cleanup time, by the very loud cleanup song that's playing in the background potentially, by the bright lights, by children who sometimes they this is part of the timepiece also, is that giving direct instruction So during cleanup time, if you see lots of kids aimlessly wandering, Steph used the word idle time. If they're aimlessly wandering, think about, how can I change my language other than it's time to clean up? So for example, so this is just one concrete strategy. Okay, you, Stephanie and Lisa, it's your job. Go put 3 things in the bin and then come back. Or go put 3 things in the bin and then go tell Daisy that she needs to put 3 things in the bin. So depending on the age group of the child, following 1 or 2 step directions, this is one strategy for helping cleanup time be a little bit less chaotic. And I know we've kind of jumped around between time, space, and climate a bit, but it really does all interact and flow together in terms of, you know, how you perceive behaviors.
Yeah, and also think about, if you're feeling a certain way, communicate that with the children.
Yes.
Because they're able to recognize that, you know, if you say, I see that you're all very excited, but, you know, if you even say, like, I'm feeling a little excited too. Maybe if we went outside and got some fresh air, this would help. Or I remember being a first-time teacher and talking about, my head hurts. I'm having a headache today. I'm wondering if you guys can help me with that.
I have tension in my head. This is it's a good vocabulary expanding. I'm feeling nervous-sighted. Yeah. A combination between nervous and excited. Play with the language. Play with the emotion labeling.
Because it will only help them recognize if they're feeling the same way.
Right.
And they can say, I am too. And forming that kind of community of recognizing what you're feeling and your emotions, that's how we create that caring community of learners we have. We want to make sure that if children will come up to you and they'll say, Tommy's stressed out. I can see he's nervous. Not just the face that we see, but feeling and their body language, recognizing he's sad. I think he's sad.
And engaging in inquiry with the child. Well, how do you know? How do you know Tommy's feeling nervous? How do you know that? Let's look at his body. Let's see. Let's ask him. Engaging in inquiry about social emotional things with the children is part of helping them develop the language and the skill set to regulate.
Yeah.
So I think we're about done with episode 1.
My goodness.
Yeah. So I think what we would like to do is our email addresses will be on the handout that you receive with the link to this podcast. And we really do love co-creating answers. And we really do love embracing the process of figuring all of this out. So send us process statements. Talk about your process with your technical assistant specialist through GrowNJ, or with your director, or with a coworker. There's no shame in process. And knowing when things aren't quite going the right way, that's the first step. So feel free to send us process emails, because we really do love co-creating these answers with you and with each other and with our whole team. So
yeah, and please send us feedback. You know, this is our first episode, and we hope to continue in the future. And send us ideas that you have, if you have any, for future episodes. We'd love to bring people on. We'd love to change the format up as well. So if you have any feedback for us, that would be fantastic. We love hearing feedback. And, you know, if you took some of our ideas and some of our pieces and you implemented them in the classroom, please let us know.
Yes.
Please let us know how things are working for you. If they're not, we'd love to, again, co-create and help you through your TA, through GrowNJ Kids, and just help you with that. But we hope this reached you. We hope that you had a great time. We hope that you learned something today. And we hopefully will see you next time.
Here's to co-creating answers.